Hey everyone, welcome once again to another glorious day and another Fitz in Law School episode. I'm Fitz, and today we're going to be talking about something kind of interesting, and that is staying motivated within law school. Staying motivated within law school is a super tough thing to do, especially when you're surrounded by potentially lawyers that don't really like their job, or when you're surrounded by people who are suffering just as much as you are in law school. And law school it's hard work. Of course, it's hard work. And so, because of that, sometimes it's hard to stay motivated. So, because of that, I thought that I would bring you some tips and tricks about how to stay motivated within law school. So, the first thing I think that we should talk about is we should talk about keeping things within perspective. Keeping things within perspective is a pretty sort of basic thing to think about when you're trying to figure out how to stay motivated in law school. It is essentially fitting everything that you're learning and fitting that case after case after case that you go and read into what you want to do later in your life. So there's a reason that you're learning all these things. There's a reason that this idea of anything from torts to contracts to IP litigation, to litigation techniques, to statutory interpretation, all those kinds of things, they fit in really, really well for you to be a well-rounded individual when it comes to being a lawyer. And so because of that, it's really worth building on all that knowledge and essentially not only understanding where the law comes from, but also the development of the law that you're learning and the ways to apply the law. When you graduate law school, you want to be a resource. You want to be something that people can turn to understand how they can go and win their case. A lot of times people will come to you. And again, when you become a lawyer, people are all of a sudden going to start asking you questions. I mean, your friends are going to come to you and say, "Hey, I think I might have a legal case here," something like that. It's always going, and you're going to be a fantastic resource from your family. If you're in a company that doesn't have that many lawyers, you're going to be a very, very important person to go and turn to essentially say, "Hey, you need to talk to legal before we do something like this." You're going to be this kind of a resource that's going to need a lot of fundamental background information and background knowledge into the area of the law. It's a complicated area, and you're becoming an expert in that area. And so that just comes with the territory of essentially understanding that you need to be a resource where you either know the answer or you have the ability to find out the correct answer so that it allows people to go and use you as the resource that you're training to be right now. So putting all that into perspective and understanding that there are certain things that you're definitely going to need in order to move forward within your career. It's kind of hard to think about a certain situation within the legal sphere that doesn't call upon a lot of different kinds of law. Most basic stuff like tort law or like contracts, those fit into a ton of different areas that you could possibly see. If you're releasing a product, there's enormous amounts of contracting that go into it. Even if you're the ones who are producing the item, you're still going to need to do contracts with your employees. You're going to need to do contracts with distributors. You're going to need to do contracts with advertising firms. I mean, all these things kind of have this basic idea of contracting within them. Once you release that product, there's going to be every single product on the planet has ridiculous things that happen to it that result in people getting hurt. You're going to need tort law for that. There are just so many things that fit into each one of these things. If you get sued and you're in federal court, you need civil procedure. If you are sued in any kind of a court, you're going to need civil procedure. Like property law, you're going to have to discuss a lot of different things with, especially if you're like the sole legal counsel within a startup or something like that. You're going to need to discuss property rights if you want to expand your property, and yet unfortunately you're not able to do that without dealing with the city a little bit. Then you're going to have to talk about zoning. You're going to have to talk about all these different things that really, really fit together if you really think about it. And again, the more that you learn about all these different subjects, the more you're going to be able to synthesize every single one of those and essentially come up with really, really interesting ideas and how to apply these kinds of things. So keeping all this kind of in perspective is a really, really good way to kind of stay motivated to Because a lot of times I remember, the most classic thing in, like, when you see it in grade school or junior high or high school, is someone going and learning trigonometry and saying, when am I ever going to use this? Well, it's that's not really the case here, because all of this kind of legal theory and case law, just it builds upon itself. And so there's definitely a reason why a lot of times you start with the history of the development of a certain law to understand how far it's come and where it started to where it ended. And it's, well, actually, it never really ends, because these rules are always being modified, and laws are being changed, and common laws changing. So it's a really, really important thing to make sure that you keep all that in perspective. Another thing that definitely helps is seeing the end of the tunnel, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, because that's a really, really important thing. I think I might have told this story before, but I've experienced lawyers who have been bitter, and they've been I don't know, just not really respectful to their clients. It's again, thankfully there hasn't been that many lawyers. I've met and worked with 100 or 200 lawyers in my life, and I can think of one or two that have been like bad lawyers, not in that like their skills are bad, but then they just have like a negative attitude, which is something that's almost even worse. If you have a negative attitude but you do great work, no one's really going to want to work with you. And if if maybe your skills are lacking, but you have a really great go-get-'em attitude, people are going to want to help you improve. And so that will allow you to improve. And anything is better when you have a positive attitude. So, yeah. But essentially recognizing this light at the end of the tunnel. And I mean that in law school, and I also mean that during litigation or in the particular legal task that you're trying to tackle at that time. This is a field that definitely has project after project after project. It's either addressing some sort of legal issue, it's fighting out a case, it's doing these kinds of things that have a timeline, and that you can see like a certain sort of completion of that timeline. There are certain fields where the work never really ends and stuff, and that might be true for some things, but in terms of the law, legal conflicts, sure, they might never end. Or legal issues in general might never end. However, specific conflicts, like a case, that does end, and there is a good positive outcome at the end of that. Whether it could be a resolution to the issue, or it could be your client winning, or something like that. But it's that satisfaction of having a job well done, about recognizing that there is an end to that, and seeing every sort of bit of that every step of that project to be just a check mark. I mean, I'm a big list maker. I really like making lists, and there's nothing better than going and crossing something off a list. And so because of that, I think that the pursuit of the end goal is a really, really satisfying thing that you're really, really going to want to keep in mind. Again, it's kind of going back to my first point. Why exactly are you doing this? What is the end goal? What exactly are you trying to do? And a really, really interesting thing about law is that a lot of times from the very get-go, you are really forced to identify that, especially when it comes to even just talking to a client at the beginning and saying, what exactly do you want? They go and they say, like, it's a very basic and important thing for a lawyer to do, is to essentially make sure that the client essentially knows what they're trying to get. If someone burned their, like got into a car accident or something like that, and they want $1 billion, then that's going to be something that's pretty difficult for a lawyer to do. A lot of times there's other things, like I've read lots of these different interesting books and cases and stuff talking about what this person was trying to get was just an apology from the company. There's lots of different ways to do this, and understanding. And so the good thing about being in the law is that at some point these things are defined for the lawyer as what the end goal actually is. And so because of that, it's always a good idea to keep that in mind and keep in mind the end goal. And so in your situation within law school, the best thing to really do is to keep in mind what you're learning, and keep in mind this idea of of becoming that lawyer and becoming that resource. That's the end of your tunnel. That's the light at the end of the tunnel. And at the same time, that phrase also implies that there's just nothing but darkness, throughout the entire tunnel. I mean, that's not true. It's fun to get rid of finals. It's fun to finish up. It's fun to make new friends and do new clubs and like all those kinds of things. So that's really, really fun. And then lastly, I would say probably making sure and doing it for your clients. That's probably a really, really big thing. It's really not, a lot of people, and I swear, so there's this one statistic that I can never remember where I saw. I'm not quite sure where it is, but it was essentially something talking about how a very, very popular thing for law students to do once they get into law school is say, I'm going to be a First Amendment free speech lawyer kind of a thing. And it comes from a really, really good place to understand the power of the law and understand the kinds of problems that you want to tackle with your law degree. Free speech is a very romantic issue, especially in the United States. And we have all our American friends, and every single American grew up with this idea of how important the right of free speech is from the First Amendment. And so because of that, a very, very common thing that people do once they try to get into law school, once they get into law school, say, I want to be a free speech lawyer and I want to help the downtrodden and all of that stuff. And that is, obviously, it's a very noble thing, but once people get out of law school, that's actually one of the least popular things, because people understand the litigation a little bit more. They understand how many opportunities there are with that kind of law. Not that many. There's not that many openings at the ACLU. A lot of the case law is kind of settled on First Amendment rights. Unless you get into things like, what does it mean on the internet, or what does it mean to criticize individual, something like that. And, freedom of expression, freedom of religion, now it's semi-okay to practice. Like, that's definitely developed. Like, religious freedom, it's kind of okay to discriminate against people if that's your true religious belief. But, I don't agree, but whatever. So there's just lots of kind of like interesting things that people try and do when they kind of get it in their head that they want to get a law degree, and then that kind of modifies over time. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that what you're fighting for when you have a law degree is not a noble thing that you're trying to do. It's important to think about. I mean, even big corporate clients, still they, there's definitely something noble about that. And you can do things kind of the right way. It's a very stereotypical thing to say lawyers have no souls and lawyers are terrible because they're hired guns that do anything. So it's kind of interesting to think about the fact that, first of all, lawyers are hired guns in that they are assigned a job and then they do it for money. Like that's kind of, I'm not quite sure how any profession is really different than that. I guarantee a lot of people don't like their jobs. And so a lot of people usually do things for money that they wouldn't normally do. And so because of that, I kind of don't quite understand that criticism. Where the criticism slightly has merit is when people decide to do weird, shady things when it comes to being a lawyer. And that's possible. That's entirely possible. And so it's your choice about whether or not you want to do that. If you go and you work for a company that encourages you to do that, there are many jobs and there will always be many jobs, especially for such a kind of esoteric and a job not really open for automation just yet, that a lawyer has. And so because of that, you have the ability, especially once you get a law degree from a good school, to go to many different places and offer your services and your legal advice and stuff. And so because of that, you don't have to do these things that you might find morally reprehensible, and you don't have to lie, and you don't have to make negative choices that you might not be comfortable with making. And at the same time, you can also work for large clients, and you can also work for large corporations that are pursuing something in a reasonable and beneficial way to society, so that you have the ability to fight for what is righteous on behalf of these clients. And not only that, there are possibly thousands of people who are counting on you to be able to make a proper argument before a court, or write a brief, or protect the company from legal issues, so that those hundreds or thousands of people have jobs. And that's always a good thing. And so keeping in mind at the end of the day that you have the ability to do good work and be an honorable, good person is something that you can do anywhere, no matter what, and you should do it no matter what. And so because of that, you don't have to become this social justice warrior kind of a free speech is the only way to really defend the little guy, or if the person that I'm defending is not is a Fortune 500 company, therefore it's bad. That's not true. In no way is that one goes hand in hand with the other. That's absolutely not true. And so because of that, you can still do these things, even if you work for a law firm, even if you work for a big company, even if you work for a tiny company, even if you're representing someone who's going up against a big corporation. There's all these different ways that you can sort of fulfill that dream of becoming someone who stands up for what's right. Because what's right is what's right. It doesn't matter if it's simply because you don't like someone, or simply because someone does not have a good reputation in some sort of way, does not mean that the issue that they're arguing for is not the right thing to do. And so, it would be foolish to simply label everything that someone that you disagree with as bad simply because you disagree with them. You need to examine these ideas on the merits, and you need to examine these ideas in a fair and rigorous and honest way. And so there's absolutely no reason in the world why you can't do that. And so, staying motivated, keeping those three things in mind is always something that's really, really important, and something that each one of you can do, and I believe in you. So I think that maybe last time I mentioned that we were going to talk about extracurricular activities and moot court and trial team stuff. So that's going to be next week's video. Okay. I just thought that I would give you a little bit of a booster, a pep, a spring in your step as we go into. For me, it's the last week of school before finals period, and it's also I ended my job at the city attorney's office last week. It was the last week because I wanted to have a little bit of time in between finals and stuff where I could really start to study really hard. And that was just a great experience. I still loved that I did that. Lots of really, really interesting projects. So next week we're going to talk about like extracurricular activities and like the ability to stay sane while you're trying to get into law school and while you're trying to succeed at law school. All right. See you later, everyone.